Is the LUMIX G9ii what the GH6 should have been? The more I use the G9ii, honestly, the more I love it. It's kind of like almost using the GH5. It's kind of like a nostalgic feel to it, but with lightning fast autofocus. And yeah, the actual feel of the G9ii is like using the S5 II or the S5 IIX, but the overall experience of using the G9ii is a lot like using the GH5. And I don't know, maybe it's because you're busting out all these, micro four thirds lenses that I haven't used for a while. But from a user experience, I have not felt this joy from the GH6 like I experience with the G9ii. Now, this is totally just an opinion video, and it's just to kind of spark some conversation. If you want to know more about LUMIX cameras, like some of the settings and everything, I've got a ton of them on my channel. If you want to go check those out, just hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of those. So let me start by saying this. I absolutely love the image coming from the GH6. It's genuinely a cinema camera in the most hybrid camera way. It's definitely more cinema camera than not. But I really wonder, and I'm hoping not, but did LUMIX kill off the GH6 with the release of the G9ii? Is the GH6 really, our fault? Like, I know, me personally, I was like calling for an update to the GH5, like a predecessor to the GH5. And we knew that it had to just totally blow the GH5 out of the water. And we were calling for it like crazy. We wanted that new GH5 style camera. And we wanted this. We wanted 4K 120. We wanted all of these different things. And a big thing was that autofocus that we did not get with the GH6. So I'm kind of wondering, was the GH6 released a little too soon? Now, without knowing a lot of the ins and outs of LUMIX marketing and what they were doing behind the scenes and everything, then mixed with the combo of all of us calling for a predecessor to the GH5, was the GH6 released a little too soon? That's just one of the things I'm wondering, especially because just a couple years, like a year and a half later, G9ii was released with the hybrid phase detect autofocus. So I was kind of wondering, like, why didn't LUMIX just wait to release this? I know we were calling for it. I know that we were like demanding the GH6, but was it released just a little too soon, knowing that hybrid phase detect autofocus was in the works, especially with the S5 II and then the G9ii? If you get the experience at some point to sit down and hold these two cameras, the GH6 camera body is far superior than the G9ii. So with the GH6, I mean, you have fans all over the place, so it's truly gonna be unlimited recording. It's not gonna overheat. I'm gonna be talking a little bit about overheating in some future videos, but I know Micro Four Nerds, Emily over there, has had issues overheating on the G9ii as well. And it does come down to some certain shoot settings on here, but there is no fan on the G9ii. There's fans all over the place on the GH6. You have the screen that pops like this. It's great for getting different angles. My last video that I put out, I said, this is my B-roll camera because of some of the different types of angles that you can get with it. And the GH6 just feels hefty in your hands. You know what I'm saying? Feels good. It looks good. I mean, in my personal opinion, and remember, this is an opinion video, you don't have to share any of these things, but the GH6 body, in my opinion, is far superior to the G9ii body. And I already said that the G9ii body is basically like holding an S5 II. Even the cages of the S5 II fit this camera body right here. But I think these two cameras serve a couple different purposes. And like I said in my last video, this is a perfect EDC camera for me. And I'm gonna have a whole EDC camera bag setup video coming out very soon. So make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss that. Both kind of serve their different purposes. The GH6, I love rigging out the GH6 and really building like a cinema rig around this camera. And I use this camera a lot for B-roll, so that's perfect to have a nice balance when you rig it up with the GH6. Personally, I don't really ever see myself rigging up the G9ii. It's basically, this is the setup for the G9ii that I foresee in the future. And so when it comes to some of the settings, one of the big things that was released with the GH6 was the dynamic range boost mode. And let me tell you something, I don't even touch the dynamic range boost mode. And I haven't touched it since I sampled the dynamic range boost mode making some YouTube videos for the GH6. Basically non-existent for me. And I know that the G9ii is supposed to have like an upgraded version of the dynamic range boost mode. I haven't even touched it on this camera. I don't think I'm gonna touch it. My workflow is better with a dual native ISO so that I can just switch on that high frequency real quick, knowing that I'm gonna get like the best image possible at a high frequency ISO. And so for my workflow, I don't even use the dynamic range boost mode, but I know it was a big deal when it came out on the GH6, and I appreciate the effort that went into trying to master that. But when it comes down to it, for me personally, I don't even touch it. And I don't see a whole lot of use cases with the G9ii in my personal workflow. Now, you may have a totally different workflow where the dynamic range boost mode is gonna work great, but the way I use the S5 IIs, I just pop on that high frequency, pop on the low frequency, and I get great results with the dual ISO on the S5 II and the S5 IIX. You know, maybe I'm not in the right scenario for the dynamic range boost mode for these cameras, but I just don't use them. And this is where I'm kind of worried about, did they kill off the GH6? But the G9ii can basically do everything that the GH6 can. I mean, you have DCI 4K 120p, you have ProRes recording, you have USB-C to SSD recording, which was a big deal coming out on the GH6. You have a firmware update for RAW recording with the G9ii, but then you actually have some improvements over the GH6 on the G9ii, like I think a better IBIS. You have the real-time LUT option on the G9ii, and then have I even mentioned the autofocus? The autofocus is not even a comparison. Out of all of those things, what I think the GH6 has over the G9ii is a more cinematic image. And I use that very loosely because a lot of times that's going to depend on the lenses that you're using as well. But the G9ii I feel like has just a little bit more of a digital looking image, kind of like the S5 II and S5 IIX. But the GH6 has a nice softer, more pleasant looking image. And then back to the autofocus. I know that they put a lot of effort, the engineers, everybody in the LUMIX team put a lot of effort into improving the contrast-based autofocus on the GH6, but it's just not there. I really appreciate that effort and trying to make those improvements over the GH5 with that contrast-based autofocus for continuous autofocus for video. But when you compare it to the G9ii, I mean, you can't compare it to the G9ii. There is no comparison. The G9ii autofocus is so good that if you're doing any type of gimbal work, if you don't have a focus puller, doing any type of gimbal work or any type of tracking shots, the G9ii is so much better than any autofocus system, setting, anything on the GH6. It makes me kind of sad, and I'm gonna tear up a little bit because I feel like the GH6 could have had that. It could have had it. And I remember when the GH6 was released in the announcement, and it was like, I really feel like they missed it with the GH6 and not putting the hybrid phase detect autofocus on this system. They made up for it on the G9ii, and I don't think there's any firmware updates or anything that is gonna allow the GH6 to get that. I'm not totally sure, I don't know, but I don't foresee that happening. But what it does do, having that phase detect autofocus on the G9ii, what that does do is open up the door for a new system like this, Micro Four Thirds system, whether that's a GH6 Mark II or whether that's a GH7, that really does open the door for this style of camera, the GH6 style of camera, like a cinema style camera. It opens the door for that hybrid phase detect autofocus system to go into a system like this. And I know there's some other systems out there, like some of those LiDAR systems that allows you to kind of rig up an autofocus system for a camera like the GH6. But if you just want to strip down your setup, it's nice to have the autofocus in camera ready to roll at any time you need it. But remember, this is just an opinion video. Let me know what you're thinking about all of this in the comments, and we can get a conversation started down there. And let me just re-emphasize what I've already said. I love the GH6. I love the image quality that comes out of it. I love the image look that comes out of it. I love the body style. And maybe love is a strong word. I love my wife, but maybe really like this camera. But I really like what the GH6 offers, and I use it a lot. I use it all the time in certain scenarios. And we can get into the conversation about, whether you need autofocus. No, you don't need autofocus, but it is so nice to have on something like the G9ii that you wish that it was on the GH6. And if you have that autofocus, that phase detect autofocus, you might as well use it. I use it all the freaking time. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using really good autofocus. I wish the GH6 had it. So was it released too soon? I don't know. I'm not behind the scenes for LUMIX, but I feel like the GH6 can be replaced with the G9ii. It's kind of a bummer. The G9ii is what the GH6 should have been. But basically, it'd be great if it was in the GH6 body. So anyway, total opinions. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments. We can get a conversation started down there. And I know there's some strong feelings about this. And you might even be like, Caleb, what are you even talking about? That's totally fine. Let's get a conversation started down in the comments. I talked a little bit about why I think the G9 II is a perfect EDC camera. Well, that makes it a perfect travel camera. So check out this video that's popping up on your screen right here, why I think the G9 II is the perfect camera for traveling this year. Go check that video out right here.